Hello and welcome back to the Cracking FAANG YouTube channel. Today we're going to be going over some of the top behavioral questions you'll encounter in an interview. Obviously there are so many questions out there and it's impossible to cover them all, but a lot of the questions fall into the same categories and we can cover these. Today's video will be split into a few topics. The first thing we're going to do is do a basic introduction to behavioral interviews. The next we're going to discuss the STAR approach to answering questions. Then we're going to talk about the popular question archetypes. Then we're going to answer the question of should I lie in my behavioral interview? And the fifth topic will be how to prepare. Before we get into the first topic, please don't be a freeloader, like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel. All right, let's start with the first one. Let's very quickly talk about the basics of a behavioral interview. Why do we do them? We do them to assess your people skills. We also want to learn about your prior experience outside of technical work. And we want to answer the question of how well do you work with others? Now, it's important to know that systems design and behavioral interviews will form the basis of what level you are assigned when you get an offer. The way that you answer the questions and the way that you carry yourself in these interviews will make a big difference. What are some of the ins and outs of an interview? When it comes to the structure of a behavioral interview, you can expect a series of questions about your prior experiences that you've had at the workplace. The interviewer here is not really interested in the nitty-gritty technical details, but overall how you handled each situation and the actions you took. Each question will likely have multiple follow-ups to really understand the situation and gather as much signal as possible about you. Okay, now that we've gone over the basics, let's talk about the STAR approach to how we want to answer these questions. Before we jump into the questions, I want to quickly cover the STAR approach. And this is a general framework that we're going to use to approach any interview question, and it will help provide the necessary details that your interviewer is looking for. So STAR stands for S, situation, and this provides the context for your answer. Task answers the question of why you were doing what you were doing. A is the action or what you did, and R is the result, so the result of your actions. And it's especially important to do a good job on the first two, situation and task, because skipping over the relevant context and motivation for your actions will actually just paint you as a gung-ho junior engineer who doesn't think before they speak. And if you can't provide the relevant context for a simple question in an interview, then likely you're not doing it for a real project, and this is an immediate signal that's going to distinguish you between junior engineers and senior engineers. So make sure that you go through all of these steps when answering a question. Okay, let's now get into the first most popular question type. Popular question you will likely see in every behavioral interview is one related to your ability to deal with conflicts at the workplace. This question can take many forms, but the core is the same. How do you deal with situations where you don't see eye to eye with someone else? You can expect questions like, tell me about a time you had a disagreement with a coworker or leadership. Tell me about a coworker you did not enjoy working with, or tell me about a time you had to work with a difficult colleague. With these questions, there's definitely a right way to answer them and a wrong way. So let's examine what some of these are. So, what is the wrong way to approach this problem? Well, if we exhibit aggression or some sort of contempt for the other person, then this is obviously bad. We want to make sure that we're actually grounding all of our points in logic and not being irrational. We also want to avoid using labels like idiot or annoying. Trust me, there are people who are total idiots and are extremely annoying, but when you're talking about this in your interview, do not use these terms. It will not portray you in a good light, no matter how stupid or annoying the person actually is. Refusing to admit that you were wrong or being self-centered and egotistical. On the flip side, how do we want to approach these questions? Well, we want to make sure that we convey that we have empathy for the other person, that we tried to understand the other person's point of view, we had clear logical rationale for our position, and we used objective data to argue our point. In the case where we couldn't come to an agreement, did we seek mediation from senior engineers and managers if you couldn't reach a consensus, and accepting the outcome regardless of being right or wrong and just moving forward? So as we can see, there's definitely two ways to answer this, one wrong way and one right way. So we want to make sure that our answers are kind of focused on this part and avoid, if possible, well, not if possible, you should definitely avoid these behaviors here. Okay, let's move now to the second type of question. C relates to how you handle work that isn't clearly defined. You can definitely expect this question the more experienced you are because it's important for senior engineers to be able to deal with ambiguity and solve larger and larger scale problems. When answering this question, you want to be careful with how you answer it. How a senior engineer approaches discussing an ambiguous project will be very different from how an entry level or junior engineer does. Typically, we see the following patterns in more junior engineers. They tend to have a sense of helplessness when presented with an ambiguous problem. They may convey a sense of displeasure or being annoyed when handed an unclear problem, like, why me? Why do I have to figure this out? This is too hard or too vague. Another thing we want to avoid is not understanding the goals of the project well enough. We also want to avoid not taking the time to understand the problem space and what other work streams for this project may already exist that we want to leverage. We also want to avoid talking about how we rushed into action before fully understanding the problem. Now, how should you actually answer this question? Well, you want to make note of the fact that during your approach, you asked a lot of clarifying questions. You gathered data to build or verify a hypothesis. You understood who the domain experts were, and perhaps you leveraged their knowledge. You also made a point to understand what is already known about the problem space and what remains unknown. Also, you want to make it clear that you didn't just try to boil the ocean and do too much. You obviously need to limit the scope of your problem initially. And what else? You want to also talk about how you compromised with the partner teams you were involved with on features and functionality. Likely, not everyone's going to get everything they wanted. Also, you want to touch on how you made a short-term or long-term action plan, because obviously what you do in the beginning may not be what you do long-term. Sometimes you just need to get a V1 out very quickly and then iterate it as you go along. And the last thing you want to make sure is that you talk about how you formulated and communicated the trade-offs of various approaches. As you can see, the way to approach this question is by conveying that when presented with an open-ended and large-scope question, that we as senior engineers don't rush into a solution without doing our due diligence. We need to understand the problem better, ask the right clarifying questions, get the opinion of people with more context than us, and then try to create a good mental model of the problem space. Okay, that's the second one, managing large-scale or ambiguous projects. Let's now move to question type number 3. Another common class of questions we'll see relates to how we prioritize work and make sure that we're meeting our deadlines. Some common questions here are, how do you prioritize work streams when you are involved in more than one? How do you handle a situation where a partner team has different priorities than yours? Or tell me about a time when a project took longer than expected and you missed a deadline. For questions like these, generally what we want to convey is that we understand the higher level goals of the team and the project and align our priorities with this. For issues of conflicting priorities, it again comes down to dealing with conflict and being open to compromise and coming to a mutually agreeable solution. In the case of not meeting deadlines, it's really important to not point fingers and shift the blame. Take accountability when things aren't your fault, and make sure that the partners are informed of the setbacks and why they're happening. These are the ways that you typically want to structure your answer when you're approached with one of these questions. The next class of question relates to how you react when you receive criticism or constructive feedback about your performance and actions. This question is great for assessing your maturity as an engineer and whether or not you're able to take actionable steps from feedback. When answering this question, here's the things we want to avoid saying. We want to avoid talking about how we took the feedback personally, or that we rejected it outright without any objective consideration. You also don't want to make it seem like you didn't take any positive action going forward, or that you didn't ask for any clarification in the areas that you disagree with. Remember that not all feedback will be applicable or realistic. You don't always have to be a pushover and just accept everything at face value. You can challenge feedback at times. The best things to display are being open to feedback and accepting that when you messed up and could have done better, and also taking actionable steps to improve in the future. This is generally how you want to frame your solution to these questions. Question I want to discuss is one which revolves around how you're able to win people over to your side. This question has many forms, but at its simplest, we're answering the question of, tell me about a time you had to convince a coworker, a partner, or leadership of something. Here, we once again want to show our maturity as an engineer and make sure we avoid answering in a way that conveys, just believe me because I said so, or do this because I told you so, or being pushy and not understanding the priorities and wants of the other party involved. To best answer this question, we want to convey that we use facts and data to present an objective argument to the other party, that we fully understand the other party's point of view and take this into account with our proposed solution. We should also be willing to compromise and not insist that we do everything one way and only one way. We should also have confidence in our convictions and be willing to fight for our position and not be a pushover at the first sign of pushback. Set of questions is a generic catch-all. These are standard questions that we've pretty much all heard before. These are things like, tell me about yourself, or why do you want to work here? What was your most impactful project? For these types of questions, there's really no right or wrong answer. The general approach is just to try to link your answers to the culture and values of the company. For example, if you're interviewing at Meta and you get asked what interests you about working here, then you can answer that you're drawn by a strong engineering culture, fast-paced development cycle, and being able to tackle problems of a large scale. These questions tend to just be openers and will tend to spill over into the more meaty questions. The final thing I want to discuss is the question of should I lie? And the answer here is an emphatic no. Definitely do not lie or make stuff up in these interviews. Interviewers are trained to ask clarifying questions and dig deeper into your answers. You are playing with fire and you risk contradicting yourself and getting caught in your own web of lies. What you can do instead is to take a real scenario and slightly alter the outcome with what you should have done or what you now know was the best path forward. This way, you still have a solid base to work with and it will come off as much more genuine as compared to trying to make something up and then rehearsing that lie. Remember that you cannot fake it until you make it here. If you are an E4, you're not suddenly going to be able to answer these questions and get yourself leveled as an E6. You simply won't answer the questions in the right way. You just don't know how because you're not an E6. It doesn't work that way. You cannot fabricate experience. The purpose of this video is not to help you inflate your achievements, but instead help you to paint them in the best possible way and give your interviewer the signal that they are looking for. I'm warning you now, you lie at your own risk when it comes to behavioral interviews. Before I leave you, I just want to talk about how you actually prepare for a behavioral interview. The best thing is to just look online for examples of commonly asked questions. You can definitely use some of the example questions in this video as a guide. LeetCode discussion forums usually have lists of behavioral questions that people have seen. You can also just Google it. There's tons of Medium articles or just websites which talk about common behavioral questions. I'd recommend that you probably come up with 3 to 4 scenarios in your career which you can talk at length about when asked some of the most popular classes of questions. Remember that one question can have multiple elements to it and give signal in more than one area. When you're looking at questions online, for each question you encounter, you don't necessarily have to answer it, but you can just think of which of your anecdotes that you did in the last step would actually be applicable for this question. It's also important to practice each one of your questions and answers in the mirrors using the STAR approach to make sure that you actually explain things clearly and you're not getting tripped up or trying to remember what exactly happened. The last thing, or second to last thing, is to actually have an anecdote ready for each of the popular tiers of questions. You do this to avoid blanking on interview day or saying, oh, can we come back to this one? Also, the last thing to remember is don't panic when the interviewer starts asking follow-up questions. They do this to get more signal and not to poke holes in your story. Alright, and thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. Why not join our Discord community? There's a link in the description below if you want to continue the discussion or ask some questions about the video. We'd be happy to have you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!